You know how it is we're just swamped with information day in, day out, and really getting to grips with what someone actually means? Well, sometimes it feels like trying to catch smoke.
Yeah.
We just assume we're on the same page, but then, bam, you stumble over words or ideas that aren't, properly pinned down.
That's a spot-on observation, and it's pretty much exactly what we're diving into today.
Okay.
You, our listener, sent over some really fascinating bits from a chapter in Professional Generalism.
Ah, right.
And it tackles this surprisingly tricky world of definitions head on.
Right. So our mission today with this deep dive, it's kind of simple, but I think quite powerful. We want to take these insights from the book and, make them really practical for you, help cut through that fog that fuzzy language can create.
Whether you're at work or just, well, living life.
Exactly. We're hunting for those practical tips that can maybe stop misunderstandings before they even get started.
And it's worth pointing out, the stuff you provided, it really zooms in on definitions, how we make them, how we use them, and crucially, why they actually matter.
Okay, so let's jump right in then. A core idea from the chapter. The absolute need for clear definitions.
Yeah, the author really hammers this home.
They do. If we want our communication to, actually land, especially in professional settings,
Right.
we just have to be precise about what our terms mean. Think about, I don't know, project goals, product features.
Even how we measure success.
Exactly. Clarity is just, it's the bedrock.
And what's interesting is how the author sort of draws a line between that professional talk and, say, creative writing or just casual chat. In those spaces, metaphors and analogies, they can be fantastic. Spark imagination, make a quick point.
Sure.
But in a professional context, if you don't have solid definitions sitting underneath those figures of speech, well, you're kind of walking on thin ice.
Totally. It immediately made me think of that example in the book. The CEO wants a CRM system that's like a Swiss Army knife for the sales team.
Yeah, the classic metaphor.
On the surface, sounds great, versatile, loads of tools.
But what does it actually mean in terms of software features?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. And the author points out the really crucial skill is being able to break down that appealing metaphor into, well, concrete needs.
Okay.
So the tech team, or whoever, has to ask, what specific functions are we talking about? What kind of flexibility does multifunctional mean? Contact management and sales tracking and what else?
Right, you have to unpack it.
You do. Unless those metaphorical blades of the knife become clearly defined features, you could build something completely wrong.
A costly mistake.
Very. So the core idea is metaphors.
Yeah.
Useful starting points, maybe,
Yeah.
but without rigorous definition underneath.
Yeah.
It can lead you way off track.
And it's a great point that, once you do have those solid, clear definitions locked down, you can bring metaphors back in to help explain things, like saying the project dashboard is your mission control or something.
Exactly. But only if everyone already shares that basic understanding of what the dashboard is and does.
Right.
The metaphor then becomes like a helpful shortcut, not the foundation itself.
The foundation has to be solid first.
Precisely. The metaphor aids understanding. It doesn't substitute for it. And the chapter also touches on something important, cultural differences.
Ah, yeah. That
Right.
complicates things further.
It can. That whole Swiss Army knife image.
Yeah.
Super familiar in some places.
But maybe means absolutely nothing somewhere else.
Exactly. So even the metaphors we choose to explain things need a bit of thought, culturally speaking.
Okay, so clear definitions are key for avoiding mix-ups. Got it. Now, the book also brings up this really interesting angle about accountability and how a lack of precise definition can sometimes create a bit of, wiggle room.
Yes, the exit gate idea.
Yeah.
It's insightful. When definitions are vague, it sort of opens the door to ambiguity. And potentially, as the author puts it, a way to sidestep responsibility. If things go sideways, someone can always say,
Well, that's not exactly what I meant.
bingo.
Yeah.
It's like the ultimate, my interpretation differed card.
Yeah. But, okay, on a more positive note, the chapter argues that even though hashing out definitions can sometimes feel like, pulling teeth,
It really crafts.
it can actually be super beneficial.
Absolutely. The process itself, just trying to nail down a term precisely, even if you don't end up with one single, perfect, universally agreed definition, That process can lead to new insights.
Like refining the idea.
Or revising it.
Yeah.
Or maybe even deciding, you know what, this definition isn't working, let's scrap it.
Okay.
It really underscores that definitions aren't, like, fixed in stone. They are, as the author says, human-made constructs.
And they change.
They're absolutely subject to change.
Which is kind of mind-blowing when you stop and think about it.
I mean, it really is.
The book gives some big examples of this. Once taboo are now normal, science evolves.
Our whole understanding of dark matter, for instance.
Right, or even something as fundamental as time itself. Its definition has shifted, but the example of privacy really jumped out at me.
Yeah, the evolution of privacy is a powerful illustration of this fluidity. The chapter traces it back to that early 20th century idea, Warren and Brandeis, the right to be let alone.
Which made sense then, pre-internet.
Exactly. Understanding that history helps us see how much definitions are tied to their specific time and context.
But fast forward to today, and privacy is, wow, it's so much bigger.
Hugely. Data protection, online interactions. Think about GDPR.
Right, data minimization, the right to be forgotten.
All those concepts. And now throw in AI and surveillance tech.
Oh, yeah?
And we're grappling with consent, facial recognition, algorithmic accountability. The definition is constantly being stretched and reshaped.
By technology, by society.
Precisely. And connecting this back, the author highlights how this moving target definition of privacy has real concrete impacts.
In different fields.
Absolutely. Cybersecurity pros have to navigate these shifting lines. Lawyers interpret and apply new rules. And in healthcare, remember the switch to electronic medical records.
Huge change.
It demanded a total rethink of patient privacy, leading to things like HIPAA. So the key takeaway, definitions aren't just abstract word games.
They have real-world consequences.
Tangible effects.
Okay, so definitions matter in the real world. And speaking of real-world debates, the book makes a sharp point about how to critique a definition effectively.
Right. It's not enough to just wave it away and say, that's wrong or that's vague.
Yeah.
Well, according to the author, that kind of criticism isn't very constructive unless you're offering something better.
Ah, okay.
The argument is you can only really critique someone else's definition effectively if your own definition is clear and consistent.
So you need to bring your own clarity to the table.
Exactly. Vague criticism without an alternative suggestion. It doesn't really move the conversation forward. It's like pointing out a problem without hinting at a solution.
The technical debt example from the book really nailed this, I thought.
That was a good one.
You've got people throwing the term around loosely for like any old quick fix or shortcut in software development.
Very common.
But then a senior developer steps in and offers a much tighter definition, something like architectural or implementation choices that trade future maintainability for speed now, where the cost of those future changes can be quantified and tracked.
And what's insightful there is how that clearer definition immediately creates a framework.
Right. It gives you something to do.
Exactly. Suddenly the team knows, okay, we need to document these decisions. We need to estimate the future cost. We need to track this debt.
It turns a fuzzy complaint into something manageable.
Precisely. The core insight, effective critique. It starts with clarity on your own terms.
Okay, now this next bit from the chapter, this really shifted my thinking. The distinction between unities and constructs.
Ah, yes. This is quite foundational to the author's framework.
It feels like it's about how we fundamentally perceive reality.
In a way, yes. Unities, as the author defines them, are things with physically perceivable boundaries.
Things you can point to.
Or see under a microscope. Things you can observe directly. A person, an atom, a rock, a tree. They exist in a tangible, bounded way.
Okay, like physical objects or beings.
Basically, yes. Understanding this helps us see the sort of base layer of reality that we're then trying to define or make sense of.
Right, but then we have constructs, and these are different.
Fundamentally different. These are the things we create as humans to organize and understand the world.
Concepts, ideas.
Concepts, ideas, systems. Things like justice or a school system or even the idea of a team. They don't have those same sharp physical edges as unities.
Ah, I see. Recognizing that distinction feels important. It highlights how much of our understanding is actually, well, built by us.
It is, and the author goes on to categorize unities, raw material, living organisms. But the really crucial point here is that even the act of categorizing things,
Putting them in boxes.
yeah, grouping things together, even that is a human construct. It's a framework we impose on the world to make it more manageable.
Like classifying animals into species. or books into genres.
Exactly. Those are systems we created.
And the book mentions there can be different ways to classify things, like where humans fit in the animal kingdom, that ongoing debate.
Right. But the core idea remains. Constructs essentially define unities, and at the same time, we need unities, the tangible things, as the building blocks for our constructs.
It's like they depend on each other.
A very interconnected relationship, yes.
Okay.
And the author makes another critical point here about how something becomes true within this system.
How so?
Well, it's based on either our own direct perception, seeing the unity, or our trust in someone else's account of perceiving it.
So seeing is believing or trusting someone who saw it.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And this also means that the labels, the constructs that we apply to individuals or things can vary.
Depending on who's doing the labeling?
And what framework they're using, yes. It's all about perspective and shared agreement, ultimately.
Okay, so it's complex. Unities are the tangible stuff. Constructs are our mental maps or systems for understanding them. The chapter then drills down into different types of constructs, which I admit got a little dense.
It does get more detailed, yeah. But the author lays out a fairly helpful structure, I think. 3 main groups, all interconnected.
Right. Elementary, foundational, primary, and supportive interpretative.
Think of it maybe like layers of meaning making.
Okay, let's start at the bottom. Elementary or foundational constructs. The book calls these media constructs.
Right. These are the absolute basics, the building blocks of communication itself.
Like symbols, signs.
Symbols, signs, yeah. Then collections of those, like individual words. Then bigger collections, like grammar that structures the words.
And even things like sounds, melodies, idioms.
Exactly. These are the fundamental tools we use to build, send, receive, and interpret meaning about everything else. They are the medium.
The very foundation. Even a red traffic light meaning stop. That's an elementary construct.
Precisely. It's a symbol conveying agreed-upon meaning.
Okay. Then layer 2. Primary constructs. These seem to be about the who, how, what, when, where of things.
That's a good way to put it. This is where we start applying constructs to unities. It includes how we assign categories.
Like calling something a dog or a chair, or grouping people into a committee.
Yes, those are assigned constructs. Then, within primary, you also get constitutional constructs. These define established roles and relationships.
Like manager-employee, or captain-team.
Exactly, or teacher-student, doctor-patient, established hierarchies or roles.
Got it. What else is primary?
Then there are physical constructs. These describe the actual features or states of unity.
Size, color, temperature.
Things like that, yes. The observable characteristics. And finally, eventological constructs. These deal with occurrences or events.
Like a meeting, or a chemical reaction, or a car crash.
Right. Whether they're unrelated events or events that result from interactions, or just the context surrounding something.
Okay, so primary constructs add a lot more detail about the things and happenings around us.
They do. And recognizing these different types helps us see where communication might break down. Is it a misunderstanding of a basic term? A role? A physical description? An event?
Right. Which leads us to the third layer, supportive or interpretive constructs. This is where we get into the why, isn't it?
Exactly. These are constructs that aren't always directly physically sensed, but we accept them as existing or useful for explaining things. They build on the first 2 layers.
Okay, so what types are in here?
Well, first you have investigative constructs. These
Yes.
are basically all the fields of scientific inquiry.
Physics, biology, sociology.
Right. They offer structured ways of investigating and explaining phenomena, frameworks for understanding the why.
Makes sense.
Then you have calculative constructs.
Yeah.
These are concepts and properties that can often be measured or quantified.
Like time, space, weight, volume.
Exactly. And the book notes these tend to be a bit easier to define, at least where there's agreement on the physical aspects or units involved.
Yeah.
We generally agree on what a kilogram is.
Mm-hmm. More objective, maybe?
Often, yes. Then we move into more subjective territory with abstract constructs.
Yeah.
These are relative ideas.
Like good devil, beauty, ugliness, freedom, oppression.
Those kinds of concepts, yes. Highly dependent on perspective and context.
Okay. And the last one?
Inferential constructs. This involves things we infer rather than directly observe.
Like judging someone's character as honest, or describing a situation as risky, or an atmosphere as tense.
Precisely. Things like emerging roles, relative judgments, intangible features or states, intangible results of events. The author emphasizes that these abstract and inferential constructs are really bridging the gap between the observable and the unobservable, the sensed and the inferred.
And these abstract ones, they feel like the trickiest to define.
They often are. Because they are so subjective, the author suggests we really need to be proactive about defining them in context to avoid misunderstandings.
It's really fascinating how they all stack up. The elementary ones are the language we use.
To communicate about the primary ones, the who, what, where.
And then the supportive ones help us interpret the why.
Exactly. They all work together.
But as you said, this brings us to the real challenges, doesn't it? Trying to define those constructs that we can't directly see or touch, the abstract and inferential ones.
Because, as the book really highlights, trying to nail down one single universal definition for something like leadership or well-being or even situation awareness.
It's incredibly difficult, isn't it?
It is. And what's insightful here is the variability. How these things are defined changes across cultures, across disciplines, across time.
Right.
The author makes a distinction. Social constructs often just sort of evolve organically within a society, whereas scientific constructs are usually developed more deliberately, maybe bottom-up, with specific characteristics defined.
Oh, okay.
But even then, take situation awareness. The chapter mentions Ensley's model, perceive, comprehend, project. That's one way to define it. Quite structured.
A common one in some fields.
But it's still a model, a construct.
Yeah.
Other fields might define or measure situation awareness differently. It's not like defining weight, where 75 kilograms means pretty much the same thing everywhere.
That's a really stark contrast. And it highlights the danger, right, of just assuming everyone means the same thing when they use a word like philanthropy, for instance.
Absolutely. What one culture sees as a laudable act of giving.
Another might view differently, maybe even suspiciously.
Potentially, yes. Or think about something really contentious like assisted suicide, viewed completely differently depending on where you are and the prevailing cultural or legal constructs.
It really drives home the risk of assuming shared understanding with these abstract or inferential terms.
Definitely. And the chapter just briefly flags these potential traps, like treating these ideas as totally objective or purely personal whim, hinting there's more on that later in the book. It just highlights this ongoing challenge of navigating these less tangible concepts.
So, okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. After this deep dive into definitions, constructs, unities, what are the big takeaways the book wants us to remember?
Well, the author wraps it up pretty neatly. We're reminded, first, of just how crucial precise definitions are for communication that actually works. Second, that definitions aren't static. They live, they breathe, they evolve.
Right, the privacy example showed that clearly.
Third, the real risks and potential for avoiding accountability when language stays vague.
The exit gate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And fourth, that fundamental understanding that the constructs we use are categories, concepts, systems. They're human creations. We built them.
Okay. So based on all that, what are some actual concrete actions that you, our listener, can maybe try out?
The chapter gives some really practical nudges. First, actively pursue clarity.
In your own communication.
Yes. Be explicit. Define your terms, especially key ones. And when you hear a metaphor being used for something important, make the effort. Try to translate it into specifics.
Okay, be the translator. What else? Second, foster productive debates about definitions. Don't shy away from asking, wait, what do we mean by X here?
Even if it feels awkward sometimes.
Especially then, maybe. Those conversations, even if tough, can build huge shared understanding and head off problems down the line.
Right. Third,
evaluate your constructs critically. Take a step back. Think about the key concepts, the jargon, the models you use regularly in your work or life. Are they still fit for purpose? Do they need a refresh or refinement?
a bit of conceptual spring cleaning.
Sort of, yeah.
Sure.
Fourth, promote inclusivity in terminology. Be mindful that words can mean different things to different people, different cultures, different professional backgrounds. Try to use language that bridges those gaps.
Good point. And finally,
document definitions, especially in teams or projects. When you agree on what a key term means, write it down.
create that shared reference point.
Exactly. Get everyone on the same page, literally.
Okay, so the big message here feels pretty clear. Making the effort for clarity and definitions isn't just about, being fussy with words.
Not at all. It's actually a fundamental skill for talking to each other effectively, for working together well.
And just for navigating this complex world with a bit more shared understanding.
Yeah, makes sense.
Indeed. And maybe just to leave you, our listener, with something to chew on.
Okay.
Think about a concept, something you use a lot or hear a lot in your work, maybe your personal life, something you suspect might be a bit fuzzy, open to interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
take a moment, maybe later today,
Right.
just reflect on its underlying definition, or maybe its lack of one, and ask yourself, how might getting clearer on just that one concept actually improve your own understanding or your conversations with others?
That's a great final thought. This deep dive has definitely given us, well, me anyway, a really useful framework for thinking more critically about the words we use.
And the concepts behind them.
Yeah, the concepts that really shape how we make sense of, well, everything around us.